Disney's Cruella tells the story of a creative genius who comes from a working-class family, her single mother being her only support system in life. From her childhood, Cruella, born Estella, rejects the hierarchies of a capitalist patriarchal society around her on her mission to express her bold individuality and to use her creative talents to the fullest. Her mother, Catherine, sends her to an elite preparatory school to help her to advance beyond her working-class background. At school, Estella develops solidarity and friendship with Anita, who also rejects the hierarchies that lead the boys to bully them both. With this anti-establishment mindset ingrained into who she is, Estella readily fights for her equality and respect, even at a young age. Unfortunately, disrupting the status quo makes her the bully in the eyes of the elite institution, and she is expelled from the school. This illustrates the role elite institutions play in furthering class divides along economic, gender, and racial lines. The boys who bullied them received no punishment even though they were the instigators. On their way to London, where the little family will start a new life and send Estella to a new school, Estella's mother stops to ask for financial help from a mysterious friend at an extravagant ball. Estella sneaks into the party and is blown away and inspired by the creativity of the fashion, and perhaps also by the gratuitous display of wealth. Estella is soon chased outside by Dalmatian guard dogs and watches them push her mother off a cliff to her death. Now alone in the world, feeling responsible for her mother's death, Estella rides in the back of a garbage truck to London, where she meets Jasper and Horace, two juvenile pickpockets who live outside the system in an abandoned building. Over the years, Estella uses her sewing and design abilities to fashion disguises for the trio to wear on their heists. These young children grow up with no education or resources and have to commit crimes to survive in our brutal society that punishes children for being born into poverty. These three would not have survived if they respected the rules of society, so they learn not to think twice before breaking the rules, which they do in order to get Estella a job at a high-class fashion store. Estella is committed to keeping her head down and working hard to pursue her dreams, but she quickly learns that wage workers' dreams do not become realities. No matter how hard she works at cleaning, rigid workplace hierarchies prevent her from doing anything else for the store, and her tremendous talents go unseen. This fate is familiar to so many who don't have lists of prestigious schools, internships, or job experience in their resumes and are forced into entry-level positions that don't suit their abilities. This class barrier is by design, so the upper class can reserve higher-paying positions for themselves to maintain their wealth and power. Custodial jobs are deemed undesirable and lower class by our capitalist culture. In reality, businesses completely depend on the hard work of custodians and would be unable to function without them. The low wages of so many jobs do not reflect the hard work being done or the value they create. So many jobs essential to a functioning society have unlivable wages solely because business owners can get away with it and are actually encouraged to pay workers as little as possible by the market forces of capitalism. It's a good deal for owners to give their workers a bad deal. The success of Estella's career as a fashion designer is, under capitalism, necessary for her survival and also for her goal of being able to express herself creatively. However, Estella quickly learns that this success does not depend on her stellar abilities, but on the whim of her supervisor, who is a verbally,
why are you talking?
Physically,
Not now.
and emotionally abusive classes. But he is not an owner in the capitalist class. He is also in the working class. But the way things are benefits him in the form of his relative wealth and easy job, so he works to preserve the status quo and its hierarchies. He represents the portion of the working class placated by liberal reformism that will always idolize the owning class before building solidarity within its own. You can see this in his affected posh mannerisms, style of dress, and the cruelty he puts on to imitate the rich ruling class he is so enamored with. Fed up with the stagnation at her workplace caused by capitalist hierarchy, Estella gets drunk off the liquor in a supervisor's office and vandalizes a window display in a protesting artistic gesture. Estella tries to keep her head down and do things the right way, but when that leads to nothing but abuse, she's ready to drop the act and be the bold, expressive individual she was born to be. The next morning, high-class fashion mogul the Baroness enters the store to find Estella's supervisor fumbling to explain the vandalism in the window. He tries to express solidarity with the Baroness and distance himself from the status quo disrupting window display by deriding Estella for her, quote, breeding. This is a colloquial reference to the far-right fascist pseudoscience of eugenics popularized by the Nazis. Racists and other far-right ideologues believe that race and genetics determine a person's capabilities in society and have fought to prevent or discourage poor people and racial minorities from having children or breeding. This pseudoscience gives credibility to class divides. For example, if your parents had traits that led to poverty, they would pass those undesirable traits like stupidity or laziness onto their undesirable desirable children. Poverty is therefore incurable because it is in lower class people's DNA. This is obviously evil and unscientific, and it even goes against the propaganda of the American dream that says that anyone can become anything thanks to the freedom of American capitalism. The Baroness, however, does not want anything to do with a lower class person who isn't helpful for her, as she states later in the movie. But Estella, with her confrontational style and creative genius, would be helpful and profitable for her, so the Baroness hires her on the spot. This is an example of how capitalism is eager to commodify the aesthetics of the working class in their protest, simultaneously stripping them of their meaning. The Baroness wants to harvest Estella's fresh, populist perspective as if it were a natural resource. The next morning in the workroom, the Baroness reads a raving review of her last show in the newspaper that says how brilliant she is. This is contrasted with the following sequence, where all of the brilliant designers she employs rush back to work while the Baroness goes to sit in her office. In capitalism, business owners can participate in management, which is real work, but they technically don't have to do anything except for owning the company. In our capitalist culture, we attribute the accomplishments of a company's employees, like designers, to the owner personally. However, in our story, the Baroness is not lazy. She's a savvy businesswoman with good, albeit abusive, management skills. What makes her a villain is her rampant exploitation and, yes, abuse. When the Baroness returns to the workroom to view the designs her employees created, she adjusts Estella's design with a knife and nicks Estella's hand, causing her to bleed. The Baroness ignores Estella's pain to ask someone to bring her a red fabric the color of Estella's blood. As she's enduring this abuse, Estella watches the Baroness in awe, mentally taking notes of how to, quote, get things done. The Baroness will pay workers to mass-produce these dresses to sell in department stores and keep the profits for herself while paying her designers and manufacturers wages as low as negotiably possible. This exploitation is considered to be a good business deal in capitalism because if workers were paid how much value they create, owners would be left with how much value they create, which is usually none. However, in this example, the Baroness does do valuable work in the form of management and marketing. Still, talented young designers like Estella are broke and have no means of producing and selling their own labor without factories, tools, and supplies, so they have to take an exploitative deal from a capitalist like the Baroness, who started with enough wealth to afford her own means of production. This is a very blatant class barrier, and our culture leads us to believe that the Baroness somehow deserves tyrannical levels of control over her workers, despite the belief that we live in a free society. Estella befriends Artie, who owns a secondhand clothing store. He's on the floor working and not exploiting employees. Artie is queer and explains how their hetero-patriarchal society meets him with abuse on the streets, but he perseveres in his quest for radical self-expression, and the two bond over their anti-establishment queer styles. Back at work, the Baroness forces Estella to stop designing, which is her specialty, to fetch her fancy lunch. This is a power move to remind Estella that she belongs in the lower class and can be made to do this undesirable, menial work on a whim. The specialization of labor like food preparation is essential, and any enterprise would surely collapse without it. But under capitalism, lots of essential labor is looked down on culturally in order to further exploit the lower class workers who do it. People will call these jobs entry-level and low-skill before essential to the functioning of a modern society. After the Baroness takes credit for another one of Estella's designs, Estella notices that the Baroness is wearing her late mother's necklace and devises a plan with Jasper and Horace to steal it back at the Baroness's upcoming ball. There, the Baroness confronts Estella's childhood comrade Anita, who has become a journalist, and throws away her pen stating, quote, "No one is interested in what you write, my dear, just in how I look." This sentiment reminds me of the spectacle the ruling class puts on in the Hunger Games to entertain, impress, and ultimately placate the lower classes. Are there any highly publicized events in your society where the rich and powerful create a spectacle of fashion and wealth to garner support of their followers? In a defiant gesture of protest, Estella, now disguised as Cruella, takes a champagne glass from the bottom of a pyramid, causing the entire structure to fall and shatter on the ground. This disturbs the ruling class's spectacle and creates a distraction for her plan. Liberating a glass from the bottom that was actually holding the entire structure up is a fitting metaphor for destroying the hierarchical structure that has been holding Estella back her whole life. Cruella then lights her cloak on fire, showing that she has a mastery over the ruling class's language of spectacle and will play their game to subvert it for her benefit. Under the distraction of her spectacle, Horace sneaks upstairs to steal the necklace dressed as an unassuming worker, a common strategy in this story. At this point, the Baroness threatens to employ the strong arm of the the ruling class, the state. She says she will have Cruella arrested for trespassing at her high-class party. Thankfully, Jasper, who was also disguised as a common worker the upper class would overlook, releases rats that cause a distraction, during which Cruella escapes. Back at their flat, Estella abusively commands Jasper and Horace as Cruella in a way reminiscent of the Baroness. Then, she pays a visit to her friend Anita to explain her plot to steal the press's attention from the Baroness, and Anita shows class solidarity in her eagerness to help. After returning to work as Estella, the Baroness uses surveillance to discover that her employee has made a design during her lunch break in a public alley, and she steals it from Estella. According to the Baroness, she owns, quote, alleys, designs, people, and their souls, and she tells Estella to check her employment contract. This is an example of how capitalists like the Baroness use the state and its laws to further their exploitation. Estella does not have the means to challenge her powerful employer in court, and most working class people choose not to challenge their employers because they cannot survive if they lose their job. This extortion of the working class is fundamental to capitalism. Cruella continues to upstage the Baroness at big events, and a montage of newspaper articles show that the media's focus on Cruella's spectacles has hurt the Baroness's sales, and that the police are after Cruella. The Baroness goes to Anita's office to intimidate and threaten her to reveal Cruella's identity, but Anita continues to show solidarity. This is an example of the ruling class's readiness to strong-arm a free press to benefit themselves financially. It reminds me of a provocative quote from Che Guevara about the Cuban Revolution. "We cannot make a revolution with free press. Newspapers are instruments of the oligarchy." Depending on where you live, this might feel like an exaggeration, but in the 1950s, Cuba felt more like a colony than a country. The ruling class allowed American companies to own the sugar plantations that brutalized Cuban workers for profit. General Batista, the US-backed pro-capitalist dictator Che sought to overthrow, actually sent the military to every newspaper and radio station to force them at gunpoint not to cover his coup. Batista worked extensively to maintain the illusion of a free press for the West while controlling the press with a bloody iron fist and lots of bribery. Obviously, a free press would be great, but in our capitalist reality, there is so much financial, political, and even violent pressure that curbs the press to the whims of the ruling class. The woman who published the Panama Papers was killed in a car bomb in 2017, and no one even cared. In the 1950s, Cuban peasants could never have afforded the time or money it would take to start their own newspaper to give the working class perspective, and they would have been drowned out by Batista's capitalist Ministry of Propaganda anyway. And as we saw with the SOS Cuba hashtag, the moment modern-day Cubans have a grievance, our corporate media jumps at the chance to blame it on socialism while ignoring the US's globally condemned blockade that's been starving the Cuban people of resources during a pandemic. Back at work, Estella stays up all night sewing special beads onto a beautiful dress. When the workroom is admiring her stunning dress, the Baroness says, "I've done it again," even though Estella clearly did all the work. That is because, as a capitalist, the Baroness owns Estella's labor the same way she owns fabrics and machines in the workshop. Under capitalism, labor is commodified and used like any other resource to profit the capitalist who paid as low a rate as possible for it. That's good business. The two women celebrate at lunch, where the Baroness comically assaults their server and tells Estella that as soon as she's not helpful, she's nothing more than dust to her. The Baroness delivers a chilling monologue about the cruelty it takes for her to achieve success under capitalism, especially as a woman. She has to view everyone else as an obstacle and can't care about what they want or feel. The Baroness says that Estella has the talent to start her own label, but the question is whether or not she has the, quote, killer instinct. Estella replies that she hopes she does. Yikes. This is the moment when it becomes clear to Estella that in order to achieve her ultimate goal of free creative expression, the capitalist world around her requires her to engage in economic domination and exploitation. If she wants independent access to means of production like the sewing machines, fabrics, and workroom that the Baroness has, the only route Estella sees is the exploitative and cruel one. And when you have to compete in a market with others who exploit their workers to the max, an alternative feels hard to imagine. Jasper and Horace claim that as the abusive Cruella, their friend has become a nightmare to work with. She explains that Cruella, quote, gets things done, while Estella does not, showing her intent to become more like the very villain she is seeking to destroy. After upstaging the Baroness and sabotaging her new collection, Cruella is followed home by the Baroness's hired goons. They tie her up and prepare to burn the building down with her inside it. Cruella asks for class solidarity from the hired men, saying that the Baroness must be a terrible boss, so they should defy her, do the right thing, and let her go. They ignore Cruella and side with the Baroness because although they are also in the working class and suffering abuse, they believe they benefit more from upholding the status quo. The Baroness is probably paying them a lot. Maybe they can't afford to lose their jobs. And maybe, like Cruella's former manager at the clothing store, abusing lower-class people makes them feel more superior than they actually are, placating their own exploitation. Although the Baroness's goons do not show solidarity, her right-hand aide, John, does. John goes against his boss and secretly saves Cruella from the fire and allows her to take refuge in his apartment. It turns out, this is the second time he saved her life. He reveals that the Baroness is Cruella's real birth mother, and her adoptive mother, Catherine, was one of the Baroness's servants. Catherine secretly colluded with John to foster the Baroness's unwanted child John was ordered to kill and dispose of. Wow, the implications here. First off, the chilling ease and definitiveness with which the Baroness can murder her own child is disturbing. Her motive is her career. As she said earlier, everyone else is an obstacle to her success, even her own child. Second, at no point in the movie does she seem concerned with the legal consequences of her actions. The ultra-wealthy never have to be. In the following sequence, the chief of police goes to the Baroness's estate to tell her there's a problem with the investigation into Cruella's death. No body was found. The Baroness responds, quote, "I don't pay you for problems," implying that she has paid for the police's loyalty and preferential treatment. On top of that, the Baroness has used her power and influence to sway the media into publicizing Cruella's death before the police have even finished their investigation. The Baroness has the police arrest Jasper and Horace, so Cruella drives a garbage truck into the police station to free them. Even in the current political climate, violently attacking a police station is morally justifiable enough for a PG Disney movie, with the story's clear context. Of course, in real life, this would be branded as an act of anti-police terrorism by fascists, but we know the context and see the carceral system as an instrument of the ruling class. After all, Jasper, Horace, and Estella were molded into criminals by the capitalist society that gave them no other option as destitute orphans. Their only crimes were ever stealing personal property and trespassing on private property, not directly hurting people. They stole from the rich to survive. Meanwhile, the Baroness has committed countless crimes directly harming and even killing people in the pursuit of property. She's admitted to murdering many people before, presumably to further her business empire, as was the case for her attempted murder of Cruella. It's not up for debate that the laws don't apply to the ultra-wealthy. Liberals admit this when they criticize the blatant criminality of people like Donald Trump, and conservatives admit this when they go after Hillary Clinton. Look at how few people trust how the American justice system handled Jeffrey Epstein. We know these elites are above the laws that apply to everyday people, but supporters of both major US political parties fall into the trap of criticizing the morality of individual actors instead of the system that allows and even encourages this unjust abuse. Conservatives and liberals are of course led into this ideological trap by the ruling class's media that focuses on individuals and never mentions the alternative of changing the system. Cruella and the gang devise a plot to infiltrate the Baroness's ball and take her down. At the ball, we see the Baroness physically abuse her employees a bit.
That's marvellous. Oh, I could do that all day.
Before she is lured by Estella out onto the terrace overlooking a cliff. There, the Baroness pretends to make up with Estella until she's close enough to push her off the cliff. However, everyone at the party, along with the police, have also been lured outside to witness the murder. With the parachute sewn into her dress, Estella secretly survives the fall, having predicted the Baroness's killer instincts, but she fakes her own death to incriminate the Baroness and comes back as Cruella. Before that night, though, Estella, who is the only living family of the Baroness, leaves everything to Cruella in her will. That means that Cruella goes on to inherit the Baroness's entire estate. That's how the capitalist villain Cruella from 101 Dalmatians is born, and also how this movie ends. Throughout the story, Cruella slowly learns how to exploit the people beneath her, abuse everyone around her, command the press and public opinion with spectacle, and finally, how to use the state to further her own goals of wealth acquisition. She lies to the police in order to steal the Baroness's property, but that's implied to be morally okay because the Baroness is already guilty of plenty else that the police choose to ignore. Capitalism is a very stupid, primitive system that rewards just the worst behavior and destruction. Smart movie though. The writers understood the assignment and put that Disney budget to something worthwhile. This analysis may have spoiled some plot twists if you haven't seen it yet, but the movie's really fun to watch, with the relentlessly badass soundtrack. Also, Emma Thompson gives a remarkable performance of the Baroness as a psychotic capitalist. That character is a lot of things at once in this movie, but dull is never one of them. Now, I want to briefly applaud the writers for the brilliant motif of public service vehicles throughout this film. We have all the garbage trucks as getaway car as a stage for anti-wealth protest art, as an anti-police weapon of liberation. And we have this beautiful and memorable scene where Cruella poetically cries on a hijacked mail bike into the sunrise. Without our beautiful public services that the capitalists always threaten to cut, how could we say we live in a society at all? And finally, I want to address this film's proximity to the hashtag girlboss movement and liberal feminism. Its dynamic female cast is a wet dream for Alison Bechdel, but representation isn't liberation. Disney's Cruella tells the story of one orphan fashion designer who ascends to capitalist success against all the odds of our patriarchal society. The film tells this story during a time in our own culture when liberal feminists are calling for more female CEOs, female cops, and female soldiers. It's a liberal's belief that also having women and minorities exploiting labor, upholding mass incarceration of the poor, and violently forcing the US's imperialism onto the global south is justice. If you pay attention, however, this success story, as well as most real ones, hinges completely on inheritance of wealth, not good old-fashioned girl guts. The liberal feminist sees Cruella as an inspiring success story of capitalism to be emulated, while the Marxist feminist recognizes all of the other orphans who slipped through the cracks of our system, the ones who didn't have a secret family fortune. Think of all the fashion designers and seamstresses, which are largely female occupations, that the Baroness and her daughter exploit and abuse for profit. For a victim to become the abuser is not justice, but it is one of the twisted stories we tell ourselves about the beauty of capitalism. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to my Patreon so I can afford to make lots more. Also, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and leave a comment of what movie or TV show I should analyze next.